Endearing Connections and Culinary Capers, Chronicles of Love and Family, Part 1. Serenity maintained her watchful gaze on Ms. Newman, noticing that she refrained from passing the drugged wine to anyone and abstained from drinking it herself. This action piqued Serenity's curiosity, prompting her to wonder about Ms. Newman's intentions. Before long, her curiosity was sated when the puzzle pieces fell into place. It wasn't that Ms. Newman was unwilling to share the wine with others, it was because the intended recipient had just arrived. In a dramatic entrance, a motorcycle rode into the opulent Dowling family villa, instantly standing out amidst the array of luxurious cars parked in the yard. However, the focus wasn't solely on the young woman steering the motorcycle, rather, it centered on the woman seated behind her, clutching a bouquet of flowers. As she disembarked from the motorcycle, she wielded a white cane, using it to navigate the path ahead as she gingerly made her way forward. Her visual impairment was evident, she was blind. Observing this, Serenity put down her glass, sitting upright as she keenly observed the blind girl's slow journey across the grand lawn, flowers in one hand and the white cane in the other. A memory flashed through Serenity's mind, the candidate chosen by Grandma May for Callum. This woman was none other than Cameron Newman, and her surname resonated with the event. Cameron, the stepdaughter and niece of Mr. Newman, the head of Newman Enterprise, had been selected by Grandma May as a potential wife for Callum. The ultimatum was clear, Callum had a year to pursue and marry Cameron, or there would be consequences. Unexpectedly, Cameron had made an appearance at the Dowling family banquet. Her progress was slow due to her blindness, and it took her longer than usual to reach her destination near Carrie Newman, the second daughter of the Newman family. While the distance was typically a brief 2-minute walk, Cameron's condition prolonged her journey to 10 minutes. Upon reaching Carrie, who was due to turn 20 and held a spoiled and capricious demeanor, Cameron was greeted with sarcasm. Carrie was the first child born to Mrs. Newman and her brother-in-law, and she basked in their affection. The Newman family's immense wealth was veiled in mystery, and their riches were staggering, but Cameron remained unaffected by it. Carrie's animosity toward Cameron was palpable. She resented the perceived theft of the title of the family's eldest daughter, which she believed was rightfully hers. Despite sharing the same mother, the sisters' relationship was rife with tension and rivalry. Cameron patiently waited for Carrie's taunts to subside before presenting her with the requested bouquet. She then nonchalantly informed Carrie of the cost, prompting a dispute over the price. The talk continued under the watchful eyes of onlookers who were accustomed to witnessing the sisters' clashes. Mrs. Newman engaged in conversation with a group of ladies nearby. She remained aware of her daughter's actions, but she chose to stay put, calmly chatting with the others. Cameron lapsed into silence, pondering the implications before finally questioning her sister. "So, you'll settle the flower payment after I've had the wine?" Amid the audience, Carrie replied, playing up the public nature of the situation, "Given the numerous witnesses here, once you drink that wine, I'll hand you $1,000. Agreed, Cameron acquiesced. Bringing the glass to the brink of her lips, Cameron was on the cusp of imbibing when an unfamiliar hand intervened, seizing the glass. "Don't drink that," a voice intervened, unfamiliar to Cameron. Startled by the intervention, Cameron redirected her attention toward the speaker, Serenity. The motivations of onlookers were mere spectatorship, but Serenity couldn't idly stand by. Serenity knew that Carrie had tampered with the wine, so she intervened to safeguard Cameron. Carrie's intentions appeared dubious, and Serenity's knowledge of Cameron's role as the wife candidate chosen by Grandma May for Callum compelled her to act. Carrie's preference for using Serenity's maiden name rather than her married name showcased her disdain. "I witnessed Miss Carrie adulterate this wine," Elisa spoke up, echoing Serenity's concerns. Although unclear of Serenity's reasons, Elisa followed suit, revealing Carrie's plot. Regardless of Carrie's standing, Elisa didn't hesitate to unveil the truth. Miss Stone, while you may have an inclination to speak your mind, consider the implications of your words. Which of your eyes witnessed me tampering with the wine? Carrie countered, casting an accusing glance at Elisa. Elisa, undaunted, held her ground, asserting, I possess two functioning eyes, both of which bore witness. Carrie's composure faltered, and she received the glass from Serenity, only to return it to her original target, Cameron. This is your wine, Miss Carrie. You should consume it yourself. Miss Stone, please allow me and her to address this matter privately. I advise both you and Miss Hunt to refrain from involvement. Carrie possessed a strong-willed nature and held no fear of Elisa. In fact, she leaned closer to Elisa and whispered in her ear, Miss Stone, while others might find you intimidating, I do not. She then stood upright and extended the wine glass once more to Cameron. Her eyes provocatively glanced sideways at Elisa and Serenity, but her words were aimed at Cameron. You can't depart unless you drink this wine. Even if someone assists your departure now, I retain the power to make you drink it later, so consume it now. Cameron bit her lower lip, trusting Elisa's statement. She suspected her sister had tampered with the wine. Forcing her to imbibe it seemed a calculated move to embarrass her in front of everyone. Cameron had attempted to distance herself from the Newman family, yet Carrie continued to target her. Carrie not only failed to exhibit sisterly behavior but persistently sought to create conflict. I insist, drink it. Carrie's arrogance was palpable. Carrie's provocation targeted both Elisa and Serenity. They might be able to aid Cameron now, but could they ensure her perpetual safety? Carrie's ability to disrupt Cameron's flower shop was a looming threat, stifling any potential resistance from Cameron. After Elisa revealed the drugging, she had no intention of drinking the wine. These flowers are a gift for you, no need for payment, Cameron offered before directing her gratitude toward Elisa and Serenity. Her usually indifferent tone held a trace of appreciation. However, Carrie's plan teetered on the brink of failure. As Cameron moved to leave, Carrie seized her, yanking her sister closer. Gripping Cameron's chin, she aimed to force-feed her the tainted wine. In a synchronized response, Serenity and Elisa sprang into action. Serenity's adept kickboxing skills quickly shifted the dynamic. She rescued Cameron from Carrie's grip and subsequently seized Carrie's chin. Meanwhile, Elisa secured the wine glass and compelled Carrie to ingest a few swallows. Despite her desperate struggle, Carrie consumed the wine, subdued by the combined efforts of Serenity and Elisa. Serenity released her only after the wine had been ingested, and Elisa discarded the glass, shattering it upon impact. The commotion reached even Mrs. Newman, who had been engaging in a composed conversation. Upon realizing her younger daughter's disadvantaged position, Mrs. Newman rushed over. Carrie pleaded with her mother to depart, sensing the effects of the drug taking hold. Aware of her own actions, Carrie was privy to the outcome of imbibing the drugged wine. Carrie's intentions had been to humiliate Cameron, but due to Elisa and Serenity's interference, she found herself in an unfortunate situation. What's happening, Carrie? Mrs. Newman inquired anxiously, her gaze shifting between her daughters. Casting a stern look at Cameron, she interrogated, "What have you done to your sister, Cameron?" Cameron's demeanor turned icy at her mother's questioning, hinting at a strained relationship between them. "I haven't done anything to her," Cameron retorted, her tone cool. As the drug began to take effect, Carrie's perception of temperature changed, inducing her to pull at her evening gown. Recognizing the symptoms, Mrs. Newman swiftly comprehended the situation and embraced her daughter. Simultaneously, she aimed a strike at Cameron, who was pulled away by Serenity before Mrs. Newman could connect. "Mrs. York, this is a family matter. I suggest you refrain from involvement," Serenity expressed, to which she received an innocent yet steadfast reply, "I already did." The circumstances called for intervention, leaving Serenity with no alternative. Confronted by Mrs. Newman, Serenity maintained a faint smile. "Mrs. Newman, isn't she your daughter as well? Aren't you going to inquire about the situation? Your younger daughter spiked a glass of wine and attempted to force it upon her older sister. Even so, it's a matter between sisters. I advise you to stay out of it. You're just a provincial individual. Do you truly believe you're a Mrs. merely because you're addressed as one by others?" Serenity's smile retained its enigmatic quality. "What does it matter if I'm from the countryside? That's inconsequential to you. Nor do I require external validation as a Mrs. Yet, as long as my husband remains Mr. York, I am unequivocally Mrs. York. Perhaps I wouldn't usually involve myself in others' affairs, but I believe I shall intercede on Cameron's behalf. Mrs. Newman, I care not about your status either. I dare you, after tonight, to lay a hand on a single strand of Cameron's hair." Serenity's gaze, chilly and unyielding, bore into Mrs. Newman. The response was visceral, eliciting a fiery hue upon Mrs. Newman's face. At that moment, the ruckus reached the ears of both Audrey and Mrs. Dowling, prompting them to swiftly emerge from the house. Mrs. Newman hesitated to confront Audrey directly. Carrie was facing the consequences of her own actions. With an apology offered to Mrs. Dowling, she hurriedly left, towing her daughter along. Once tranquility returned, Cameron expressed her gratitude to Serenity and Elisa, although she couldn't comprehend the reasons behind their aid. Amid her mother's raised voice, Cameron discerned that one of her rescuers was none other than Mrs. York, a recent topic of conversation in Wiltspoon. It was unexpected that Mrs. York would exhibit such chivalry. Nonetheless, even without Serenity's intervention, Cameron believed she possessed the means to extricate herself from the predicament. Surviving under the harsh control of her stepfather and cruelly detached mother, she had gradually gathered evidence. Her survival had been a result of her resourcefulness. Serenity expressed her concern. Uncertain if her words could deter Mrs. Newman, Serenity was met with Cameron's subdued response, "They've never outsmarted me in the past." Serenity's eyes sparkled briefly before she bid farewell. "Well then, take care." "Thank you," Cameron once again acknowledged Serenity and Elisa. Subsequently, she proceeded calmly, her white cane guiding her path. Only then did her assistant dare to approach and offer assistance. Soon after, Cameron left the Dowling estate on a motorcycle. With the disruptions caused by the Newman sisters, guests gradually departed due to the late hour. Audrey escorted her daughter and niece to bid their farewells before leaving as well. She initially dropped Serenity off in Brinfield. Remarkably, Audrey refrained from mentioning her daughter and niece's role in aiding Cameron. Awaiting his beloved wife at Brinfield's entrance, Zachary had received a message earlier and greeted her as she arrived. He opened the car door with gentlemanly grace, extending his hand to assist her out. "Aunt Audrey, would you and Elisa care to join us for tea?" Audrey declined with a warm smile. "It's late, so we won't intrude. Zachary, take Serenity inside quickly." "Goodbye, Aunt Audrey." Zachary's inquiry seemed more a formality than a genuine invitation, given his anticipation of their refusal, given the hour. The couple observed Audrey's departure before they strolled hand in hand through the neighborhood. "Saren, you look stunning today. You're always beautiful. In my eyes, you're the most beautiful woman in the world. Beauty is subjective, after all." Zachary. I might be in a bit of a predicament. Unperturbed, Zachary continued walking. What happened? Tell me the extent of the trouble so I can help you find a solution. Serenity laughed. Don't worry, it's nothing major. I simply managed to offend some people. Zachary remained steadfast. Even if it's significant, I'll find a way to assist you. You needn't concern yourself about offending others. What matters is that nobody offends you. Shouldn't you ask me about whom I offended? Zachary's gaze met hers as he responded, there's no need. It doesn't matter who you've offended, I'll always stand by your side. In his eyes, his wife was consistently right. Serenity mused, Zachary, you're going to spoil me if you trust me this much. That's precisely my intention. I plan to spoil you to such an extent that nobody else can tolerate you. That way, you'll always be mine. No one will dare to try and take you away. Amused, Serenity couldn't help but laugh. Who would even dare to attempt stealing me away once they realize I'm your wife? Sean had harbored secret affection for Serenity for years, even after discovering her marital status. He clung to the hope that she might marry him post-divorce. However, the revelation of her husband's identity as Zachary York, heir of the York family, extinguished Sean's aspirations. He attended a dinner with Jasmine and her family, revealing a more mature but reserved demeanor. His longing for Serenity persisted, but he acknowledged his inability to compete with Zachary. Sean recognized the risks of tangling with Zachary, who had retaliated against Lolo Enterprise when Sean persisted in pestering Serenity. Despite his lingering feelings, Sean couldn't risk his family business. He chose to suppress his emotions, telling Jasmine he wouldn't pursue love or marriage for the next decade. Jasmine empathized with her cousin, but her loyalty to Serenity and understanding of Zachary's devotion prevented her from enabling his interference in their marriage. Zachary treated Serenity exceptionally well. His respect extended to Elisa, acknowledging her as his cousin-in-law. Even without romantic love, they were legally united. Jasmine refused to allow her cousin to jeopardize her friend's marital happiness. Zachary teased, for now, there's no one, but as you progress and become even better, you might attract a love rival as formidable as I am. Serenity chuckled. No matter how hard I try, I won't surpass you. Besides, there's a significant gap between us. Even if I were to be vain, there's no way I could attract a love rival like you. Wiltspoon knows I'm your wife. Although many haven't seen me, they recognize my name. At the mention of Serenity Hunt, no one would dare to attempt stealing me away. As they continued their conversation during their stroll, they reached their apartment building. They rode the elevator to the 8th floor and returned to their modest home. Lights illuminated the house, and the TV was on. Zachary had been watching while awaiting her return. Where's Mrs. Lane? She's not here. I'm in no rush to call her back. Zachary desired a moment alone with his wife before summoning their housekeeper. Zachary promptly fetched Serenity's indoor slippers and suggested she swap her stilettos for comfort. Serenity sighed with relief as she transitioned to the slippers. Slippers are truly a delight. If high heels aren't comfortable for you, consider wearing flats in the future. You'll stand above others even without heels. Zachary wanted to spare his beloved wife from any foot discomfort. And Audrey would give you a stern look if she heard you say that, Zachary chuckled. She's always been quite serious. She's softened a bit after retiring, but it won't be easy since you asked her to teach you. Still, she's your aunt and doing it for your benefit. If you can endure the challenges, the lessons you gain from her will be invaluable for your lifetime. Serenity made her way to the sofa and seated herself. Zachary followed suit, propping up her feet, and began to massage them. Serenity tried to halt him, jesting, "You're the high and mighty Mr. York, the CEO of York Corporation. In your presence, I'm just your husband. My wife endured the discomfort of those detested stilettos all night for my sake. Who could prevent me from indulging her a bit upon her return?" His confident yet endearing words persuaded Serenity not to resist his foot massage. "I met Cameron Newman tonight." Serenity volunteered the information without his prompting. "Who's Cameron Newman?" Zachary remained engrossed in his massage, not even looking up. He wasn't the least bit concerned about who Cameron was. "Didn't you see her photo earlier? She's quite pretty, but her face is a bit petite. Those oversized shades she always wears occupy more than half of her face, making her appear even smaller. She has a soft and delicate way of speaking." He responded defensively, "When did I see her photo? I'm only interested in one woman, and that's you. I have no intention of looking at pictures of other women." Serenity found his reaction amusing. "I'm not jealous. Why are you so apprehensive? Cameron is the potential wife Grandma May chose for Callum. You saw her photo when you handed it to me." "I barely glanced at it and can't recall her face. Why should I remember her face or name if she's not my potential wife?" He resumed massaging her legs. "Turns out Cameron is visually impaired. Zachary, why did Nana select a blind person for Callum? She chose me, a simple country girl, for you, at least someone healthy. Yet for Callum, she chose a lady from a prosperous family, albeit blind. Additionally, it appears the Newman family isn't treating Cameron well." Zachary responded softly, "Nana must have her reasons. She matches us with potential spouses based on our personalities. Grandma May's decision to have him marry Serenity could have stemmed from the simplest reason, a fortune teller's assertion that they were fated to be husband and wife." Now, Zachary believed in those words. If given the chance, he would want to meet that fortune teller and inquire if they were destined to be together in their next lives as well. If that fortune teller were here, he might say, "Your destiny as spouses is limited to this life. Don't be too greedy. Focus on living your current life well before concerning yourself with the next." Another life. The concept of an afterlife remained shrouded in mystery. People perished when their lifespans concluded. Like a candle extinguished, nothing remained. Reincarnation's existence remained uncertain. Those who experienced it were already deceased, leaving no definitive answer. That makes sense. Callum will need to manage that. Has he begun? I don't believe so, but he frequents Josh's office whenever he can. He's likely seeking Josh's help to gather information about that Newman girl. He'll take action once he has background details. Did you also investigate me? Serenity inquired suddenly. After a brief silence, Zachary responded, yes, but my trust in my instincts and feelings outweigh the investigation. That's why I chose to hide my identity and observe your true nature. Considering your personality, you wouldn't have agreed to marry me without conducting a background check. So, why did you still doubt my intentions, thinking I might be after your wealth? I had reservations, fearing that the investigation might be mistaken, Zachary admitted, leaving Serenity momentarily speechless. Marriage is a lifelong commitment. Just as women fear marrying the wrong man, men have similar concerns. I had to personally get to know you to determine your real character. A background check merely provides a summarized account. Indeed, marriage is a lifelong journey. It seems we were both a bit hasty, Serenity sighed, yet expressed gratitude. Fortunately, we ended up falling in love with each other. Go on, Saren. I'm all ears, Zachary encouraged, steering the conversation away from their concealed marriage days, as those were the times he kept the truth from her. If not for her compassion when he unintentionally made himself sick from fasting, their relationship might still be strained. He chose not to bring up the subject of hiding his identity and lies. Shifting the conversation toward Cameron appeared to be a safer option. Cameron has a younger sister named Carrie, a few years her junior. Although Carrie is attractive, her personality is awful. She spiked a glass of wine and forced Cameron to deliver a bouquet of flowers, then coerced her into drinking the drugged wine in exchange for payment for the flowers. Elisa and I witnessed the entire ordeal. We've never encountered such a wretched sister. I couldn't stand by, and in the end, we made Carrie drink the wine instead. The effects of the drug were rapid. Within moments, Carrie complained of feeling hot and even attempted to undress. Mrs. Newman shows the same favoritism that my grandparents used to. Despite this, Mrs. Newman placed the entire blame on Cameron and even made an attempt to slap her, which is when I stepped in. Had I not intervened and let Cameron drink the wine, her rationality would have crumbled after the drug's effects. Any harm that befell her after that would have been catastrophic. Cameron is the chosen wife for Callum, and therefore, will be future sisters-in-law. It wouldn't concern me if I were unaware, but since I am, I must safeguard her. Zachary continued, Cameron is the daughter of Mrs. Newman and her first husband. Following his demise, she remarried the older brother of her late spouse. In essence, she married her brother-in-law. Serenity paused, pondering the situation. Even so, she shouldn't treat her elder daughter so poorly. Nana must have had her reasons for choosing Cameron. Perhaps there's more to it than we know. Matchmaking Cameron with Callum might also be for her benefit. What does Nana know? Serenity inquired, her curiosity piqued. Zachary contemplated for a moment and then revealed. If my assumption is accurate, the death of Cameron's father might not be as straightforward as it seemed. Serenity was taken aback by this revelation. Wealthy families often harbor hidden depths, willing to do anything for their interests. But don't worry, Saren. Our family is different. Zachary's words reassured Serenity. She had met her in-laws on multiple occasions, and whether they were older or her peers, they all seemed to be kind-hearted individuals. The only person who seemed somewhat reserved about her and not entirely pleased was her mother-in-law, but even she had never taken any harmful actions against her. During the times when she was upset with Zachary, her mother-in-law had even joined Grandma May in apologizing to her, instead of exploiting the situation to encourage Zachary to divorce her. This suggested that perhaps Tanya valued her son's feelings and happiness more than her daughter-in-law's background. Mrs. Newman glared at me as if she wanted to annihilate me. I wonder if she'll speak ill of me to her husband when she gets home. Zachary, is the Newman family influential? Did I cause trouble for you by offending Mrs. Newman and her daughter? With her legs feeling much more relaxed after the massage, Zachary took a seat next to her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. He confidently stated, not to brag, but apart from your aunt's family, there's no other clan in Wiltspoon that can rival the York family. Even if we consider your aunt's family, they still can't match up to the Yorks. Our family is extensive, united, and has connections with numerous other families. The Newmans are inconsequential in comparison. They don't conduct their business primarily in Wiltspoon. While they founded their company here, Wiltspoon merely serves as their starting point. Nevertheless, I didn't underestimate them. I conducted a thorough investigation. Their assets total around $1 billion, but the Newman family has always maintained a low profile. If it weren't for Mrs. Newman marrying her deceased husband's brother just 100 days after her husband's passing, hardly anyone would remember the existence of the Newman family. With a troublesome daughter like Carrie, the Newmans couldn't remain discreet for long. The events at the Dowling family banquet were probably already circulating throughout Wiltspoon's high society. Serenity reflected on how the attendees watched the incident coldly, suggesting this might not have been the first time Carrie bullied Cameron. Cameron had mentioned that her family had never truly defeated her in the past, which was a relief to Serenity. She believed Cameron would have found her way out of the situation. "Your knowledge is quite impressive," Zachary complimented her with a kiss on the cheek. He warmly continued, "I must be vigilant for potential formidable adversaries who might appear to eliminate me before I can react. I continually assess my surroundings for any potential threats. While I aim for York Corporation's growth, I also strive to uphold its stature. Thankfully, I haven't disappointed my elders' expectations. York Corporation has thrived under my leadership." It was faring significantly better than it did under his father's guidance. Zachary's plan was to select an heir early and nurture them attentively. Once the heir was prepared to take over, Zachary could retire early, following in his father's footsteps and live a content life with his wife. Yet, the absence of the next generation troubled him. Nana still hoped for them to have a child soon. Zachary was eager to be a father, desiring a child as endearing as Sonny. Gender didn't matter, whether it was a boy or a girl, as long as they were Saren and his, he would cherish them wholeheartedly. "Go to the room and change out of your dress," Zachary suggested, playfully attempting to lift Serenity. However, she halted his efforts with a gentle gesture. "I can walk," she asserted, standing up. The massage Zachary had given her had significantly eased the strain on her legs. "Saren, you won't even allow me the chance to display my skills. I'm working on my arm strength, you see. Carrying you around is an excellent arm workout," he teased, his face inviting a light pinch. Serenity obliged, pinching his cheek playfully. "And what do you mean by wanting to train your arm strength? You already work out every day. Let's just go to sleep." The conversation took a light-hearted tone. "I'll prepare the bath for you," Zachary redirected his intentions, deciding not to carry her to the room. Instead, he went to draw a bath, ensuring she could relax after soaking in the warm water. He also fetched her pajamas, aiming to provide her with a comfortable night's rest. Emerging from the bath, Serenity slipped into bed beside Zachary. Suddenly recalling something, she raised her head and planted 2 affectionate kisses on his cheek. "Good night, babe." Zachary reciprocated the gesture. "Good night. Sleep well." "I rarely have nightmares," Serenity mused, nestling into his embrace as they settled in for the night. Contentedly, Zachary enveloped his cherished wife and drifted off to sleep. The following day marked their return to work as a couple. Meanwhile, miles away at Wildridge Manor, Tanya received a call from an acquaintance she had occasionally played cards with. "Mrs. York," the voice on the other end began, "your daughter-in-law seems quite inquisitive. She even intervened in the affairs of other families. Such behavior can easily make her unpopular." Taken aback, Tanya inquired, "What do you mean by inquisitive? Whose family's matters did she interfere with? Has she offended you? Are you unaware that your daughter-in-law attended the Dowling family's banquet last night? She accompanied Mrs. Stone instead of being with you. Do you two not get along?" The caller questioned Tanya's relationship with Serenity. "I didn't attend the Dowling's event, but if you ask me, the Dowling status isn't worth my daughter-in-law's participation. Even though she's from the countryside, she is now the eldest Mrs. York after marrying your son. It's only fitting for her to mingle with higher circles, rather than a middle-class family. She hasn't offended me, but she has ruffled Mrs. Newman's feathers. That's what I've heard from others." The younger Newman sister, targeted her older sister, pressuring her to drink a glass of wine. Your daughter-in-law stepped in and prevented Carrie from forcing Cameron to drink. Ultimately, she made Carrie drink the wine herself. Afterward, Carrie complained of feeling hot and attempted to undress. Mrs. Newman was a mix of distress and fury. At this point, she probably holds a significant grudge against your daughter-in-law. It's common knowledge that the Newman sisters have a strained relationship, so it's no surprise that your daughter-in-law's interference has upset Mrs. Newman. Mr. Newman is notably protective of his children and particularly fond of them. Yet, your daughter-in-law's actions caused his cherished daughter to face public embarrassment. It's likely that Mr. and Mrs. Newman harbor negative sentiments toward her now. Could this be causing complications for the York family? The caller's tone became increasingly critical as they began to elaborate on Serenity's behavior. Tanya's countenance immediately turned somber upon hearing these words. Liam, noticing the dramatic shift in his wife's expression, inquired with concern, "Who's calling, and what did they say?" Rather than respond to Liam's query right away, Tanya counteracted the caller's criticisms with a cool retort. "Mrs. Walker, what does this matter concern you? While you criticize my daughter-in-law for her alleged interference, are you not doing the same by discussing this matter with me?" Unhesitatingly, Tanya defended Serenity's actions, emphasizing, she wasn't meddling, she was acting justly and saved Miss Cameron from a dire situation. Few things are nobler than saving a life. I take immense pride in my daughter-in-law's strong sense of justice. Asserting her daughter-in-law's autonomy, Tanya continued, she has the freedom to associate with whomever she chooses, and her social circle is her prerogative. I have faith in her ability to discern character. Anyone she befriends must surely be a person of integrity. Firmly rebuffing the notion of disciplining Serenity, Tanya stated unequivocally, we, as a family, stand by her no matter her choices. You mentioned Mr. Newman's protectiveness. Allow me to clarify that the York family holds similar sentiments. Let Mr. Newman attempt to exploit last night's incident involving Serenity against us. Defending the York family's position, Tanya asserted, the York family fears no one. So, if Serenity has inadvertently offended someone, it is of no consequence. What matters is that no one offends or disrespects her. Our commitment to helping her resolve any predicament remains steadfast. Highlighting Serenity's role within the family, Tanya concluded with authority, as the eldest Mrs. York and the wife of the family's future head, she possesses the autonomy to act as she deems fit. Since she doesn't concern you, contain your dissatisfaction. I expect you to stop making inconsiderate remarks in my presence and refrain from inviting me to your card games in the future. I refuse to participate with nosy individuals who seek to dictate my daughter-in-law's conduct. After addressing her standpoint, Tanya promptly terminated the call and proceeded to erase the caller's number. Who does she think she is? How dare she label my daughter-in-law as meddlesome? It's she who's meddlesome. Does she believe I need her lessons on how to guide my daughter-in-law's behavior? Curious about the source of the negative comments, Liam inquired, who was criticizing Serenity. Serenity attended the Dowling family's event last night alongside Mrs. Stone. Given their familial connection, why shouldn't she accompany her aunt? Yet, that woman perceives it as a reflection of discord between Serenity and me. What concern of theirs is our relationship? Tanya recounted the situation, highlighting Serenity's intervention. Mrs. Newman displayed favoritism and permitted Miss Carey to mistreat her sister. Serenity couldn't stand by, intervening to protect Cameron. Nonetheless, these individuals labeled her as intrusive. Even if it wasn't Serenity's immediate concern, her actions were righteous. Liam offered support to his wife. We can't control what others say. Let's not engage with them moving forward. I agree with Serenity's actions. Given the circumstances, let's stand behind her. Carrie's behavior was abhorrent. How could she attempt to harm her own blind sister with drugged wine? Had Serenity not intervened, Cameron's life could have been marred by her own sibling. Mrs. Newman is no different. Though both are her daughters, she permitted one to harm the other. How does she find peace? Tanya's empathy was clear, reflecting her commitment to equal treatment of her children. Carrie drugged her own sister. Liam's voice held an air of shock as he processed the startling revelation. Exactly, Tanya responded with a mixture of incredulity and frustration. Serenity acted heroically by saving Cameron's life, and yet these busybodies criticized her for getting involved. Can you believe they suggested that Serenity's interference had rubbed Mrs. Newman and her younger daughter the wrong way? Apparently, Mr. Newman is quite protective of his family. So am I. My daughter-in-law doesn't back down from anyone. I stand firmly behind Serenity, even if it means challenging the entire town of Wiltspoon. Of course, provided she's in the right. Liam, with a light-hearted smile, reassured her, my intelligent wife can't be fooled easily. I'm absolutely livid, and you're here smiling, Tanya retorted, exasperated. Remember, Serenity is your daughter-in-law too. Let me be clear, anyone who dares to label Serenity as a meddling and ignorant country girl better be prepared for me to criticize them. Tanya was not going to tolerate outsiders passing judgments on Serenity's humble origins and actions. While she might have reservations about Serenity's compatibility with her eldest son due to their differing backgrounds, she had never treated Serenity poorly or criticized her. Tanya was incensed that others were now pointing fingers at Serenity. Liam quickly responded, I won't joke around. I'm relieved that you're fiercely protecting your daughter-in-law. Serenity doesn't need our defense, Zachary is more than capable of that. No one in Wiltspoon would dare cross her. Serenity might end up being known as Wiltspoon's Invincible in less than a year, Tanya declared with a stern expression. Not missing a beat, Liam added with a chuckle, maybe not the nicest nickname, but let me contribute a tidbit too. Crab is likely Serenity's favorite food. When Zachary brought her to his estate, he arranged a seafood feast with the freshest catch just for her. I won't interfere in their marriage, but I won't let anyone speak ill of my daughter-in-law to my face either, Tanya asserted with conviction. Absolutely, darling. Let them know they can't just say whatever they want. Liam wholeheartedly supported his wife's stance. He knew that his son would always prioritize Serenity's well-being, but Tanya was genuinely heated, so echoing her sentiment was the best way to calm her. Mrs. Walker's call had provoked a strong reaction from Tanya. She not only received a scolding but also had her number blocked. She had underestimated Tanya's fervent defense of her daughter-in-law. Despite her own reservations about Serenity, Tanya wasn't about to let anyone insult her so openly. Strangely enough, Tanya's relationship with her daughter-in-law seemed conflict-free. Serenity might come from a different background, and her actions might not align with Tanya's preferences, but she was still the wife of the heir to the family's immense fortune. While Tanya might have her reservations, she wasn't going to let anyone disparage Serenity publicly. The insult at Serenity was indirectly an affront to Tanya herself, and she wouldn't tolerate that. Meanwhile, Mr. Newman stood outside his daughter's bedroom at the Newman residence. He waited for his wife to join him before inquiring with concern, has Carrie's fever subsided? The fever has come down, but she's feeling drowsy. I've told her to rest, Mrs. Newman replied, her voice laden with worry. The previous night, they had immersed Carrie in an ice bath upon returning home, and it seemed to have aided her recovery. The chilly spring weather, combined with the ice water bath, had left Carrie with a cold. With her fever spiking in the middle of the night, Mrs. Newman promptly summoned the family doctor. The physician examined Carrie and prescribed medication, which Mrs. Newman carefully administered while staying at her daughter's side. She only left the room when Carrie's fever finally receded. Where's Cameron? She didn't return last night. The mention of her elder daughter transformed Mrs. Newman's tenderness into a scowl. That blind girl managed to get help from Miss Stone through sheer luck. That uncultured woman supported her too, ooh. That woman with no parents seems to have gained quite the confidence after marrying into wealth. Carrie wouldn't have been in this mess if she had stayed out of our affairs. That country bumpkin acted swiftly. She must frequent the gym. As they descended the stairs, the couple discussed the events of the previous night. Mrs. Newman harbored a strong resentment towards Serenity. In her opinion, her daughter would not have fallen ill or suffered humiliation if it weren't for Serenity's interference. Cameron's shop opens at 8 in the morning. She should be there by now, Mr. Newman commented, his tone somewhat distant. Mr. Newman's response drew a more exasperated tone from his wife. Carrie went too far this time. Regardless of anything, Cameron is her sister. How will Carrie be seen if she keeps targeting her own flesh and blood? Carrie is 20 now, her marriage years are approaching. Who would want to marry her if she continues like this? Carrie is our daughter. I will find her a suitable match when the time comes. He should marry into our family. I want her to belong here, not become someone's daughter-in-law. Don't defend Cameron. She's nothing but trouble. Carrie's reputation wouldn't be tarnished if it weren't for her. I've said it before, we should have left her to her fate. Honey. Mr. Newman interjected sternly, his expression conveying his disapproval. Without saying another word, Mrs. Newman pursed her lips, her dissatisfaction clear. After a while, she finally spoke again. Carrie has been humiliated and put through a lot. Aren't you going to address it? Regardless of the Hunt girl's background, she is now Mrs. York. That's the reality. Everyone knows Mr. York is deeply devoted to her. Elisa is not someone to trifle with either. Carrie went overboard. While she usually has harmless fun with Cameron, drugging her this time crossed the line. You better talk sense into her. Make sure she doesn't harm Cameron's flower shop. No matter what, Cameron is my brother's only child. Prepare a gift. I'll go to York Corporation with it and personally apologize to Mr. York and his wife. Mrs. Newman's expression soured. The Hunt girl has agitated both me and Carrie. She publicly embarrassed Carrie. Why are we apologizing instead of defending ourselves? People fear Mr. York, but we shouldn't. Our family business isn't even based in this city. What can Mr. York truly do about it? Mrs. Newman questioned, expressing her belief that Zachary's power might not extend that far since their operations weren't confined to Wiltspoon. That lack of concern about Zachary's influence was the reason Mrs. Newman didn't perceive Serenity as a significant threat. Unmoved by her skepticism, Mr. Newman responded sternly, just follow my instructions. Don't you think I'm distressed that our daughter is both humiliated and unwell? Mr. York is a formidable individual. It's best to seek a resolution before he takes action against us. Mrs. Newman assembled a gift, her demeanor far from enthusiastic. After seeing Mr. Newman off at the door, she muttered to herself, she's just a simpleton from the countryside. I doubt Mr. York will remain infatuated forever. This girl is merely a passing fancy for Mr. York at the moment. The rustic won't retain her position as the lady of the house for long once he grows weary of her. About 30 minutes later, Zachary received an intercom call. Mr. Chaplin conveyed Mr. Newman's desire for a meeting. It was clear to Zachary why Mr. Newman wished to see him. Mr. Newman had arrived before Zachary could enact his own plan for confronting the man. "Let him in," Zachary coldly instructed Mr. Chaplin in response to the intercom message. Mr. Chaplin conveyed the message and hung up. Mr. Newman was seated in the VIP lounge on the building's ground floor, his demeanor calm yet restless. At the approach of footsteps, he composed himself, feigning a relaxed air as the receptionist approached. "Mr. Newman, our CEO is ready to see you upstairs." Rising to his feet, Mr. Newman thanked the receptionist and followed her with a gift in hand. The absence of his bodyguards was intended to convey his intention of peaceful dialogue to Zachary. In Zachary's CEO office, Zachary ended his call with Mr. Chaplin and used the intercom to summon Callum. "Come to my office, Callum." Believing it to be work-related, Callum set aside his tasks and headed to the top floor, reaching Zachary's office before Mr. Newman. "Zach?" Closing the door behind him, Callum greeted, "What's going on?" "Take a seat." Zachary motioned for Callum to sit and, though intrigued, Callum awaited his cousin's explanation. However, Zachary remained silent, leaving Callum perplexed. "What's the matter, Zach? Your silence is making me anxious. I can't fathom what's on your mind. You're making me nervous." Thinking about his recent work progress, Callum was confident he had cleared his tasks without any issues. This gave him a measure of self-assurance. "Nothing significant. Just stay seated." Callum was at a loss for words. A knock sounded on the door. "Enter." Mr. Chaplin stepped into the office, announcing, "Mr. Newman is here, sir." He motioned for Mr. Newman to enter and respectfully signaled him into the office. Mr. Newman acknowledged with a nod and walked in, bearing a gift. His entrance was accompanied by a smile. "Mr. Zachary." "Mr. Callum," he greeted the cousins pleasantly. Taking the gift from Mr. Newman, Mr. Chaplin placed it on the coffee table and poured a drink for Mr. Newman. As Callum remained seated, he stood and guided Mr. Newman to the sofa in the guest sitting area, maintaining a courteous demeanor. Zachary finally rose from his seat and circled around his desk after Mr. Chaplin left the room. He moved closer and settled in a seat across from Mr. Newman. Once seated, he locked eyes with Mr. Newman. "What is it that you want, Mr. Newman?" His tone was low and direct. Mr. Newman had long recognized that Zachary was distant and not the easiest person to connect with. It was too early for Mr. Newman to predict whether he could establish rapport with Zachary. Nonetheless, it was undeniable that Zachary possessed an aloof demeanor. With years of experience in the business world, Mr. Newman had elevated Newman Enterprise from a small enterprise to a billion-dollar corporation during his decade-long tenure. While the Newmans primarily flourished in international business, Mr. Newman also held influence and connections in Wiltspoon. "Mr. York, I've come to extend my apologies on behalf of my wife and daughter," Mr. Newman explained. Zachary's response was nonchalant, "I haven't had the pleasure of meeting your wife and daughter." "Here's the situation, Mr. Zachary. There was a misunderstanding and conflict between my wife, daughter, and your wife. I reprimanded them both. My wife is currently tending to our unwell daughter. I'm here to offer my apologies to your wife on their behalf. I didn't want to intrude without your consent, so I wanted to consult with you. Would it be possible for me to personally apologize to your wife? I sincerely apologize for the incident." Zachary was fiercely protective of Serenity. To this day, the media dared not encroach upon her, and any candid photographs of her were taken covertly. Nonetheless, these photos wouldn't find their way online without Zachary's awareness. Callum found the conversation perplexing. Why had Zachary summoned him when Mr. Newman was the one who had offended Serenity? No need for a personal apology. Just keep an eye on your wife and daughter. My wife has taken a liking to Miss Cameron and wishes to befriend her. Enough had transpired. Serenity had involved herself in the Newmans' affairs to support Cameron, and Nana had indicated Cameron's suitability for Callum. Nonetheless, neither Mrs. Newman nor Carrie took Serenity's words to heart, considering her lacking in influence. Instead, they used Serenity's intervention to further target Cameron. Zachary's message to Mr. Newman was crystal clear: Cameron was off limits. This might lead to an improved situation for Cameron. By now, Callum had a grasp of the situation. Mr. Newman was both Cameron's stepfather and uncle. Zachary hadn't called Callum for work-related matters, rather, he sought to apprise him of Cameron's predicament. Mixed feelings stirred within Callum. Dealing with this was bound to be cumbersome. When they received the photos of potential wives from Grandma May, Kevin had been incensed. He nearly burned the photo, but Callum intervened. There was no use destroying the pictures, Grandma May had backups, leaving no escape. Callum had sardonically challenged Kevin at the time: go ahead and run away from home, and stay away as long as Nana's alive. Running away wasn't feasible, and Zachary would break Kevin's legs if he tried. Although Kevin wasn't thrilled with Grandma May's selection of a boyish girl for him, his affection for her prevailed. It would be disrespectful to distance himself from home during her final days. Grandma May had granted them a year. The York brothers weren't in haste. But now, Zach was interfering. Cameron is fortunate that your wife holds her in high regard. Though a smile adorned Mr. Newman's face, Zachary could discern the artificiality. In truth, Mr. Newman was seething. While Cameron was an heiress of the Newman family, it was widely known that she was fatherless and held a minor position in the Newman household. Even the household staff treated her with indifference. The fact that Mrs. York wanted to befriend Cameron didn't sit well with Mr. Newman. He believed that Cameron had stolen the attention of everyone. Mrs. York ought to be building a relationship with his younger daughter. Despite his irritation, Mr. Newman maintained a composed facade and praised Cameron. After praising her, he continued, Cameron is a kind young woman, though she is visually impaired. Her blindness comes with numerous challenges, which might affect her interactions with your wife. He let his words linger. Zachary remained silent, glaring icily at Mr. Newman, who felt a palpable tension in the air. Callum intervened in the tense silence, breaking the ice in the office. Mr. Newman, I assume your purpose here is to apologize, correct? Callum's voice resonated in the room. Mr. Newman nodded affirmatively. Yes, that's correct. Serenity is forgiving by nature. She usually doesn't let minor issues bother her, but she values friendship greatly, Callum continued. With a pleasant expression, Mr. Newman responded, Mrs. York certainly possesses a compassionate heart. I've heard about it. It's good that you're aware. If you have nothing else to discuss, you may take your leave, Mr. Newman, Callum stated, his tone revealing his impatience. There was no need to prolong the interaction. The Yorks and the Newmans had no business ties. Mr. Newman had been eager to depart from the moment he entered, but protocol dictated that he stay. It was evident how anxious Mr. Newman was as Zachary's gaze bore into him. Despite being much older than Zachary and possibly even his father, Mr. Newman felt diminished in Zachary's presence. He had faced the most challenging moments of his life, yet here he felt small under Zachary's scrutiny. With Callum guiding him towards the exit, Mr. Newman excused himself from the room. The York brothers remained seated and did not accompany him. Callum merely instructed Mr. Chaplin to accompany Mr. Newman to the door. After Mr. Newman's departure, Callum inquired, how did Serenity become involved with Cameron and clash with Mrs. Newman? It happened last night. Zachary recounted the incident to Callum. Serenity might have seen a photo of Cameron and realized she's your future wife. That could explain her involvement. Zachary continued, however, Saren is the kind of person who stands up against injustice regardless of who's involved. She would have intervened even if she didn't know Cameron's identity. Callum was taken aback. I haven't met Cameron in person, Zach. She's not my wife. Zachary stared at him without uttering a word. Dejected, Callum muttered, I don't understand how Nana selects these women for us. Among all the beautiful women, she chose a blind girl for me. That's someone with a story worth discovering. Callum retorted, you've become poetic since marrying your wife. Zachary chuckled. You summoned me here for some gossip. What do you want me to do about it? Protect your own woman. Don't expect my wife to come to your aid. Zach, I've told you. Cameron is not my wife. Nana chose her for me. Do I have to marry her? Drawing from his own experience, Zachary advised, don't be too hasty, Callum. You might find yourself eating your words. Trust me on that. Zachary was well acquainted with the reality of having the truth backfire and come back to haunt him. Callum opened his mouth, but no words emerged. After a while, he pressed his lips together and said, I'll drop by Urban Roundabout tomorrow since it's the weekend. What's her flower shop called? I don't know, Zachary responded bluntly. Cameron's flower shop wasn't a focal point for him. He wouldn't have known its name if Serenity hadn't taken an interest and lent her a hand. Look it up if you're curious. Callum found himself at a loss for words. Let's consider it settled. Now get back to your work. With Cameron's situation in Callum's hands, Zachary dismissed him and refocused on his work. Engrossed in his tasks, he lost track of time until Serenity arrived with his packed lunch, pulling him away from work to rest and eat. Time seemed to slip by unnoticed during these hectic moments. The sun seemed to rise and set in the blink of an eye, marking the transition from day to night. Serenity woke while Zachary rose from his slumber when she had already set breakfast on the table. Why didn't you wake me up so we could make breakfast together? Zachary's arms encircled Serenity from behind. He cherished these moments of waking up and seeing her first thing in the morning. His happiness bloomed even in the simplest of days, as he had learned to value every aspect of his life through all the ups and downs they had faced. I woke up naturally, but you were still sleeping. It didn't make sense to wake you up just to cook breakfast. It doesn't matter who makes it, Serenity replied, turning his embrace to meet his gaze. Love shone in her eyes as she curled her lips into a smile. Good morning, babe. Matching her gaze, Zachary affectionately responded, Good morning, honey, and sealed his words with a kiss. The doorbell chimed, interrupting their moment. Serenity pushed away gently, saying, It's probably my sister. Audrey or Elisa would usually call if they were planning to visit. Zachary offered to answer the door. On opening it, he was met with Liberty and her son. Hey, Liberty, Zachary greeted warmly, reaching out to pick up young Sonny. A broad grin stretched across his face. Do you miss your Uncle Zach, Sonny? I do, Sonny replied in a soft voice, snuggling against Zachary's shoulder. What's wrong with Sonny? Is he feeling unwell? Zachary noticed that Sonny wasn't his usual cheerful self. Concerned, he touched the little boy's forehead, checking for any signs of fever, but found none. Liberty entered the apartment and explained, Sonny was still asleep when I left the house. He's a bit out of sorts since I woke him up and brought him here. Relieved that Sonny wasn't sick, Zachary carried him inside. He can rest in the car during the journey. The trip from the city to the Hunt's hometown was quite a distance, about 50 miles. Breakfast is ready, Liberty. Serenity emerged from the dining room. Observing her nephew's lethargy, she gently took Sunny from Zachary. Why don't you consider getting a car? That way, Sunny can nap during the ride, shielded from the wind and elements. Do you have any oats? Liberty inquired of her sister. We'll see how the business fares after the opening on Monday. If things don't pick up, I might use your e-bike. Once business improves, I'll think about getting a car. I have plenty of cars in the garage. You're welcome to use any, Zachary offered. I appreciate it, but my rental house isn't far from the diner. Given that Zachary's cars were high-end, Liberty was concerned about potential damage or incidents. Moreover, she knew Zachary would refuse to accept any payment from her. These gestures made her uncomfortable. Liberty could certainly afford a car up to $100,000, but she preferred to exercise caution and assess how her business would fare first. Serenity understood her sister's perspective well and didn't press the matter further. She carried Sunny to the dining room and settled him at the table, serving him a hearty English breakfast of toast, ham, eggs, and roasted potatoes, Sunny's favorite. As they finished breakfast, they got a call from Elisa. With Zachary's security detail in tow, they set off in one of Zachary's cars, rendezvousing with Mrs. Stone at the entrance to the community. Serenity, Liberty, Mrs. Stone, and their companions were en route to the Hunt's hometown when old Mr. Hunt arrived in Wiltspoon with his sons and 2 grandsons. They had come with a clear intention, to have another money talk with Serenity. Thanks for watching. Part 2 of Chapter 1001 to 1050 will be uploaded soon.